Has that been sitting in your car for a while?
Yeah, well, yeah, just since 6:30 this morning.
Nice. So how hot is it?
I mean, it's hot. It's not like burning my tongue, but it's fucking hot. Yeah.
I think like warm, like not hot water, but like warm water is so gross.
Yeah, because it's really close to urine. Yeah.
That's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, it pretty much is.
Minus the flavor.
Yeah. At least urine has some flavor to it.
A little taste. I'm drinking back the vitamins my body doesn't think it needs.
That's right. That's right. Don't waste that. That's mine.
I wonder if that's been a thing at any point in time. Like, I feel like somebody somewhere has had to have tried to sell some type of like gimmick where it's like, where you're really losing your gains, bro. You're not drinking your own urine. Think of everything leaving your body that could be going to your muscle. Hashtag science.
Yeah. When I was like 8 years old, one of my friends told me that he convinced his brother to drink his pee like through like a Sunny Delight bottle. Like he put it in like a Sunny Delight bottle, and his brother drank it. And I was like, there's no way that he wouldn't know that he's drinking pee
immediately.
So I was like, or would he? So I felt like I needed to try it out, and I'll tell you what, it does not taste anything like Sunny. Not his pee. I tried my own, but it tastes nothing like Sunny Delight. It's I don't know. Like I was like, there's no way he wouldn't know, and so I feel like maybe he made the whole thing up, and that's what he was going after, and it worked. So it's crafty third graders,
Bro, Sunny D, there's a throwback. I haven't had a Sunny D in decades.
I actually don't know if I've ever had Sunny D, so maybe Sunny D just tastes like this. I don't know.
It tastes like it's like more orange juicy. It's like a sugary processed version of orange juice.
Yeah.
Is how I remember it.
Yeah.
The last time I had Sunny D was probably when I was visiting my grandma when she still lived in Austin, Texas. Like, I have like a vivid memory of drinking Sunny D there when it was hotter than all get out.
Yeah. It's probably pretty refreshing.
More than your own urine.
Mm-hmm.
Better than what I had. Yeah, I would assume so. Yeah. Not refreshing at all.
That's what we're going to talk about today.
That's what we're on today.
That's where we're going. Yeah. That's what the podcast today is just going to be about alternate supplements.
Inexpensive supplements.
It's organic,
sterile, totally. And I like the taste.
Yeah, that's right.
So we could transition from drinking our own urine, and I think it'd be fun if we riffed today on more endurance, aerobic development, work capacity, repeatability, this whole realm. Obviously, like, there are so many specific subtopics within these own subtopics within that subtopic, like, that you could spend a lot of time on. But I think just a really good general conversation on this would be really helpful. You guys both did the oxygen course, so you probably think about it in a pretty similar way that I do. But just wanted to talk about this from a bird's eye view and hit on some big things when we're thinking about, okay, like when we're talking about energy system development, the ability to regenerate ATP so that I can have muscular contractions and perform work, right? Like, we're going to be talking primarily in this aerobic creatine phosphate realm, not really going to be talking glycolytics very much because it's its own weird thing. Like, it just doesn't fit. Like, the aerobic system and the creatine phosphate system are married together very nicely. And then we have this glycolytic system that's just very weird and doesn't play nice with anybody. And it's only like applicable, I think, for such a small percentage of the population, very specific sports and athletes that really like need a lot of glycolytic work. But yeah, so just wanted to get into this topic a little bit today and hit it from a few different angles. And I think a cool place to start would potentially be when we're thinking about like whole body exercise. And I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. I think one thing I would really like to get into here is the difference between when we start talking about limiters, air quotes, limiters, right? Because it's a really popular word right now, but that's really, 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 like really freaking hard to actually like nail down and determine. even if you're in a lab with super fancy equipment, like very expensive equipment, you have anesthesiologists who can place lines, and I have catheters all over the place, and I'm pulling blood, and like I can give drugs. Like even in that setting, it's hard to determine air quote limiters, right? But if we think whole body exercise versus more local muscular limiters, right? Because I think that's like a really interesting conversation to think about, like the contributors in those two worlds. So I do think that they're probably a little bit different. Like if I'm on an assault bike or I'm out running, I'm doing something that's big whole body, I'm playing a sport. Or for example, like yesterday at the gym, I'm doing more local muscular work and taking those things to failure on a machine. We have some like interesting, I think, ways in which we could talk about that limitation or the failure arising.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious to hear Ryan's take, because I think he does a great job with forcing people who want to get big and jacked to like deal with like the central like kind of conditioning piece before even worrying about the peripheral breakdown, right? Like you think you're working really hard, but you're not even able to tap into like your true like work capacity, because it's such dog shit coming in usually.
Yeah. I don't know if either of you read Endure.
I've started it actually.
I have not.
Okay. So I'm sure there's other books that kind of delve into the same topic, but I think that to me is the primary benefit. And we'll get into some of the mechanistic stuff that's a little bit more hypothetical in a sense, and James will be able to break it down pretty well, and you as well, Keiran, of like what's actually happening there. But it's still like James is saying, it's kind of mechanistic. We don't really know for sure if what's actually happening. But I think one thing we do know for sure is that you always have one more rotation on that echo bike. You always have one more stride in a run. And that to me is really interesting, because it really does. And this is the premise of this book, Endure, which I would highly recommend. It's very much written more in lay terms. It's not super scientific, but it's in there, and you could certainly reference it and go down those roads if you wanted to. But I think it's just really cool in this idea that endurance training or aerobic training really gives you the opportunity to just see what the fuck you're made of, which is kind of counter to at least how I came up, because I think I used to spend a lot of time. I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time doing it, but when I thought about endurance runners, I would pick on them more than anything else. They're like, yeah, like really cool, man. You just did something really easy for a really fucking long time. Like, but it actually is pretty badass. I've come to appreciate it a lot more, because there is this, the reason you stop is because you want to. And the other side of that, the reason you keep going is because you want to, and there you have to be like a little bit messed up in your head, like to be able to push to those places that are just ugly. They're just absolutely awful. So I really like to start there, and not to the point, like it's not like I put my hypertrophy clients on marathon programs, but I want to see that they're able to push things from an aerobic standpoint, because there's just, for one, there's so much potential for adaptation. And it really just sets the tone for like how they're going to present in the rest of the programming from here on out. Like, are you someone who's going to actually go to those awful places, or are you just going to kind of bitch out? And I think that it's really nice to learn that about yourself and to learn that about the client, because I know that if they can make it through some of these god awful circuits or some of these prescriptions on the echo bike or whatever the case may be, like, they're not going to have a problem on the leg press when it comes to hypertrophy work. And I think, like I said, there's some mechanistic rationale for why above that, the aerobic conditioning is really important at the local level. And like you said, the rephosphorylating ATP and being able to keep muscular contractions going at an efficient rate. But I think that's really the primary benefit. That's why I like throwing it in there. And I'm also a dick. Like, so I like to see these people suffer.
The truth comes out.
Because, a lot of people, like, honestly, like, I think a lot of people who strength train, like, I don't think that they're that tough. Like, I really don't. I think a lot of them, especially when you get into like the true strength stuff, and like like a strong man heard me like say this, like they could literally just break my skull with their hand. So it's like, I don't think that you're not like a badass. Like I just
straight Game of Thrones.
Yeah, like you're just gonna rip my face off. But I don't think that they go to these places because you can't really go there with just traditional strength training. Like it's you just stop. Like I mean, if you're taking 95% of your 1 rep max, you can only do so many reps there. It's not like you willed yourself to do more. It's just like there's a hard stop there. But when it comes to some of this endurance training or aerobic training, it's you don't really know where that line is until you go there, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think like a really interesting point there, because like I've recently had a big shift in my training. I'm doing way more machine work than I've ever done. I'm not really on barbells right now. I'm not even on safety bars, trap bars. It's like I'm pretty much like living in machines where I can get really great muscular feel, and it's working well, right? Like my muscles are getting bigger. I'm moving more weight. I'm getting stronger. But to your point, it's like really interesting to me. Like I'll push it to a 10. Like I'm literally hitting partials for failure and dying. But that experience still feels nothing like when I get murdered by a Metcon, or if I'm on the track, if I'm on a field. Like a lot of the shit that I've done over time in my life of these just like horrendous conditioning things, right? And then like I reflect on like how it feels failing on a machine. Yeah, like my muscle hurts, but it's nowhere near this alarm signal that you get in the elements that you're talking about. And that's where it's not, what I'm doing on machines is not easy by any means. You're working hard and you're pushing, but I'll finish and I'm like, I'm not dead. Like I'm totally fine. Like this, my perception is like this feels easier compared to a lot of this other stuff that I've done previously. And I love it right now. It's great. Super fun.
Yeah. It's interesting when you talk about like a strength athlete versus like the endurance athlete, like, and they're both kind of like sick in their own way. Right. But like, to your point, if I can get somebody who comes from an endurance background, like I've had, finance guys now who are like collegiate rowers, like those guys, I mean, once you sell them on
psychos.
Yeah. Like you have to save them from themselves sometimes. Like they just have that extra switch of like, they'll go. And to your point, right? Like the strength stuff, it's almost like it's really intense suffering, but like it might not last as long, or it's kind of self-limiting. You can only take 95% for so many reps. But having an appreciation, even if somebody has that like strength goal or hypertrophy goal, like having an appreciation for like how terrible you could really push yourself, right? Like that's, to your point, right? Like that's a good seller for the rest of the block or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I think like there's something, sorry to interrupt you, dude. I think there's something here where there is a certain alarm signal that comes from depleting oxygen levels systemically.
Yeah.
Everywhere is being depleted. If I'm on an assault bike and I'm hauling ass, I'm depleting oxygen everywhere. My arms, my legs, pretty much everywhere in my body is going to be getting desaturated. I'm depleting oxygen levels because I'm utilizing it. And there's something to this just systemic lack of oxygen and the signal that sends that is so much different than a lot of what we experience when we train with just weights. And I think that's one of the primary differences here is this very large systemic signal versus a more local signal, and the degree to which that is telling the brain and the body, hey, you're in deep shit. Like I'm going to scream at you to stop. Right.
Yeah. So this to me brings up the concept of the respiratory steel, because what I think about is actually I remember just watching videos of bodybuilders just doing sets of leg press and getting up and vomiting. And I'm just like, dude, I guess I just don't push myself that hard. But I think that they were just really out of shape. So I think like in a lot of ways, and I mean, these guys are also professional bodybuilders. They're just so massive. Right. Yeah. Like that I think
I have a thought on that. Remind me to chime in on that once you're done. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Because what I'm getting at here is I'm thinking that you almost do get this. You could be doing something very local, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking you could be doing something very local, but it becomes very systemic because of this respiratory steel concept. Do you want, and tell me if I'm totally off on that, or only halfway there, but if you want to like just review a little bit of what the respiratory steel is and how that applies here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the respiratory steel, and then I'll tell you what I think is potentially going on there, because I don't know if it's the respiratory steel. So the respiratory steel is when your muscles of respiration will literally steal blood flow from getting to your locomotor muscles, right? So if I'm on a bike, for example, and I'm hauling ass, like if you go on an assault bike and you go all out for 8 minutes and you reach that state where you are huffing and puffing really hard, you have diaphragm, I've got intercostals, I've got obliques, I have all these muscles that are contributing to my ability to inhale and exhale. They require blood flow and oxygen like all my other muscles. And so the brain will preferentially actually vasoconstrict to locomotor muscles, to like my quads, my hamstrings, my legs, my arms, and then preferentially dilate to my muscle of respiration. Because last time I checked, me having to drop my pace on an assault bike isn't nearly as bad as I can't get oxygen to my muscles of respiration and therefore I cannot breathe, right? So the respiratory steel is when you literally are preferentially shunting blood from going to the periphery and you're sending it to muscles that drive respiration. And so that will then decrease performance because of the fact that you're decreasing supply to, say, a quad, for example, on a bike. So that could be at play there. But one of the things that I think could be happening there is, like, I'm assuming we're talking in this high level bodybuilding population, we're probably talking a drug population, right? Like very, very, very large humans. And so if you have just an enormous muscle mass in your quads, hamstrings, and glutes, as an example, because we're talking about the leg press, and you start really pushing that, and you get a massive vasodilation down into your legs, right? Because like there's going to be a major mismatch between supply and demand, the blood that can be supplied versus the demand at the level of the muscle. Plus, every time you actually are on a contraction and you're under tension, you're probably not moving any blood flow. So it's an absolute shit show, right? With that as it is, like you're going to get this major vasodilation in your legs. It's this massive sink for blood to flow to. And I can use the example of this. So in the lab, when we were studying essentially young versus old, how good were they at vasodilating, vasoconstricting, the reactivity of their vessels, right? So we can put a Doppler ultrasound on their femoral artery, and we have a catheter in so we can infuse different drugs. And then we can literally watch on the Doppler ultrasound and see what happens to the artery. And then you can do a technique called a passive leg movement, and you can see how much blood flow is changing. And the younger healthy populations, if you infuse a vasodilator through the catheter, like directly into that femoral artery, a lot of them pass out because so much blood rushes down into the leg that they can't get enough blood back to the heart, and then they pass out. So we actually had a specially built chair that would allow us like really quickly like switch some levers and like flip them back so we could get the blood back to their heart. But in young, healthy people that have really reactive vessels, high-level bodybuilders should have super reactive vessels with how much they train. You put them on a big leg press and you have a huge muscle mass down there, and then it's like you come off tension and all of a sudden you're going to get this reactive like hyperemia, essentially, with tons of blood flow rushing in. All your blood goes down into your legs. Like I could see you either vomiting or passing out just because of the reaction to the exercise. That's one way that I would potentially think about that, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I also think of just heat in general, like especially with the vomiting response, and that could be partially from being out of shape, and then also just from being so large.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get a handful of things going on there potentially. But I think in this conversation, one thing that is really interesting here when we talk about this systemic versus more local type of situation, and we're beginning to think about things that are stopping you, limiters. It's important to consider that fatigue is a different category in terms of a conversation. So you have fatigue, I think that would essentially be generated because of the fact that I can't supply enough ATP, right? But then fatigue itself is this massively complex cascade of events where we have to consider the input being sent back to the brain from those group 3 and 4 afferents in the periphery, right? We know that those play a huge role. We know that if you give a fentanyl injection, like an intrathecal fentanyl injection to somebody on a bike, which blocks feedback coming from the periphery, it can change their power output on a bike. They lose the capacity to regulate pace. The central governor is not forcing them to slow their pace because it's not receiving the information from the periphery to be able to do that. And so you see these people that will actually, Dr. Marcus Amon, for people that are interested, has really good research in this realm where there's a pretty solid fatigue wall in place. And the brain works really hard to make sure that you don't go past that fatigue wall. It will preferentially decrease central motor drive being sent out to muscles. So it's telling muscles that you have to, it's essentially shutting, if you think of it just on a dimmer switch where 100 is you going all out and 0 is you doing nothing. If you start decreasing central motor drive, the dimmer switch is getting turned down. The brain is not allowing your muscles to fire as fast, as hard, as often, because it's preventing you from going past this like fatigue wall, which makes sense evolutionarily. The brain's trying to protect you. But if you remove the input from the periphery, those group 3 and 4 afferents, if I remove their feedback, that's the only thing we've found so far that allows people to go past that wall. And they totally bonk. They crash and burn. It's actually pretty fascinating to watch. But I think that's one of the other things we have to consider here is that we're in a very complex realm where you have a respiratory system, a cardiovascular system, and a muscular system. And then I also have the central nervous system and the brain that's taking input and feedback from all these places. And you get this like really intricate dance taking place. And we're thinking about your capacity to perform and have endurance and work capacity and repeatability. I don't know if you guys have any further thoughts in that realm. We can obviously dive into more specific examples and things like that.
Yeah, I would just say like that stuff is, yeah, it's super cool to understand. I don't know, like it doesn't change the prescription that much though, right? Nope. Like which is cool. Like so, like I like to understand that as much as possible, but I think we can, no matter what the explanation is, I think we still can find some merit in using these for just about everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think that's where like that some of the external stuff, right? Either like the group environment or like the figuring out how you can gamify like some of the metcons or stuff like that. Like it kind of like says like forget all that. It doesn't really matter, right? Like you have to show up today to get the high score or, you know, any of that stuff. So I really like how we try to like sprinkle a bunch of that stuff in to kind of help people push past those limiters, whatever they are, right?
Mm-hmm. Because those are all black box elements, right? We don't really fully understand them yet. We know they're there. It's really cool. It's really fascinating. And you go talk to people that research that, and we don't really know exactly what's happening there in terms of if I improve your performance per se, it could be coming from changes, probably not at the respiratory level, but it's going to be cardiovascular, muscular changes with enzyme function, enzyme concentration, the ability to flux more like substrate through pathways. But maybe it also is just the fact that the sensitivity of your afferents in the periphery are decreasing. So I'm not getting as much signal sent to the brain. Or maybe the brain is just changing essentially how it's assessing that's coming in. And we don't know any of that, right? But what we do know, as we mentioned so far, is that when we can tie this back into that endure conversation, when we're doing the things to build this aerobic energy system development, the repeatability, the work capacity, we see improvements everywhere else. Right? Like it pretty much goes everywhere from our experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also important to note, like with all of that you're never isolating this stuff completely. at least not in the way that we're doing it. I don't think. I think we always have a component of everything where we're still like we're not, when we talk about doing work capacity blocks or aerobic type of cycles, it doesn't mean that we're no longer lifting weights or something. Yeah. Right. So there's still this overlap, and I think there kind of has to be, given what you're talking about with the peripheral and the central feedback, how they do relate to one another. So there is this it's just kind of like dimmer switches in terms of the programming. Like what are we focusing on? We know that there's still going to be a component of everything in there to a degree. It's just we're putting our energy into one thing more than the other at a given time.
Yeah, I kind of like how you guys were talking about, like, it's so hard to separate and isolate out, right? You always hear like take this supplement and then it's just like a really clean, linear, like, and then here's the performance increase versus like, I forget what the example was, James, but in the oxygen course, I think it was like one of the last lectures when you were like, oh, everybody likes to say X plus Y, and then you're going to get this outcome. It's like, here's what X is doing. And it's like a whole whiteboard full of stuff. And you're like, oh, by the way, here's what Y could potentially be doing to negate X. And it's like, so you just happen to be kind of coming up with the Z, right? So kind of like bringing it back to like the work capacity, who kind of like at the end of the day, who cares why, but the work capacity in general kind of like improves everything across the board, right?
Yeah, I think the example in that realm is the one that you'll see in research is with mTOR and AMPK. Right. Everybody likes the famous the figures I love. You have a picture of someone's always snatching. I don't know why. Like someone's always like catching a snatch. And then it has an arrow to mTOR, then it has an arrow to muscles getting bigger. And then it has a picture of someone running, and then it'll have an arrow to AMPK, and then it has like, it'll give you a picture of more mitochondria and greater capillary density. And it's like, this is what I understand what you guys are trying to do, but there's not a human on planet Earth that understands mTOR or AMPK. Just Google those pathways. You can pull up a very rudimentary schema of those pathways, and it's a disaster. Like there is so much going on there. Yeah. We know they're involved. We know they're involved. But no one has any idea those interactions because there's so many ways, so many redundancies, ways ins and outs of these pathways. So many things talk to everything else. We're so far off from being able to put together that metabolic puzzle.
I had a headache after like the first 2 minutes of you like detailing all the counter cross interaction stuff. I was like, yeah, I'll take your word for it. It doesn't. But like, yeah, if you think about it, everybody, you see like the guy who like is a like casual in the gym. He's like, oh yeah, I don't do cardio with the weights. I don't want to block the or stunt my muscle growth. It's like that so is dumb. Not what you need to worry about. Like you are going to be absolutely fine with that. You'll probably get bigger from doing the cardio.
Well, that's the funny thing too, though, is like, I think your whole workout ends up being cardio when you're in that bad of shape. Like, like that is the reason you're stopping, because you can't keep up with the air that you need to expel. Like that's the issue. Like I think you kind of see that with a lot of people, where it's just like, that should not take you that long to do. Like I gave you 20 sets. Like why is that taking you 2 hours to get through? Or like why? It's just like, I know you're a lot stronger than that. Like why? How come you can only get that many reps? Like, so I think, and there could be other things, fiber typing or whatever. I don't even know if that's fucking real at this point, but who knows what could be contributing to that? It's probably a lot of things, but I think just generally, I think we know at this point that like, if you do a little aerobic work at 130 beats per minute, you're not going to lose all your gains. You're going to be okay.
Going to contribute to your gains.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going to recover faster, both in between sessions and within sessions. Mm-hmm. It's just I
mean, life just isn't as big of a deal when you have a good aerobic system. I really believe that. Like that's something that I feel and I've seen so many times. Like when you're just in shitty shape, everything like standing up is a task. Like walking up the stairs is a task, and that it all pulls away from your ability to recover from training at the end of the day. Like, so, and not to mention like, what is it actually doing during your training acutely? So yeah, I think that's good to know. That's where it is really, it's nice to know that we've gotten to the point with some of this like concurrent literature and stuff that we're realizing that it's not really as black and white as it seems. And it's not just AMPK versus mTOR.
Yeah, a lot of the concurrent literature, the older stuff, is so garbage because
it's crazy.
You look at how it's programmed, and then I'm sitting there and I'm just saying to myself, are you guys really surprised that you saw no significant outcome? You're having them do sets to failure on machines, and then they're going to go run a 3-mile time trial, and there's no balance.
Like 6 times a week.
It's insane.
Yeah. I'm like, I can't do either one of these programs.
Yeah. Here, we're going to do super high developmental strength work and super high developmental hypertrophy work and super high developmental endurance work, and then no one got better. Concurrent training is dumb. Bullshit. It's so stupid.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
But if we were to back out here and zoom out and we can come back in, if we were going to think, okay, I don't know if there's anything more foundational, like you just mentioned, Ryan, than the capacity to supply and utilize oxygen. At its core, I don't know if there's many things more important in our physiology than your ability to do that thing. And so if we think about this as a really integrated system, I have a respiratory system, a cardiovascular system, and a muscular system that's responsible for this oxygen cascade. So if we wanted to break down a little bit in terms of building up someone's endurance, their work capacity, their repeatability, we've talked about how important it is. We've hit it from a few different angles here. But I think we can actually flesh this out a little bit more, right? So if we think about the respiratory system as a whole, it's really difficult for it to be a big limiter, if you want to call it that, to your ability to move oxygen. It can come up in a few different situations. We already mentioned the respiratory steel. That's a major one. Fortunately, you can solve the respiratory steel problem just by doing really hard stuff that sucks. Because if you're breathing really hard, then guess what? Your respiratory muscles are getting worked and they will adapt. But the lung itself is a non-plastic organ. By training, I can't just grow more alveoli and have more surface area for oxygen exchange, right? So we're not really going to change much in terms of the lung, which then pushes us to have to start thinking about what's going on from a cardiovascular standpoint and what's going on from a muscular standpoint. And those are really our two best places to intervene. And I don't want to go super in the weeds on this because I don't think we need to. It's not really necessary for the people listening to this, right? But from a cardiovascular standpoint, we can really simply think of this in terms of supply. How good are you at pumping blood and supplying it and getting it to muscle, right? So I have cardiac output, which is the big supply function. It's my heart rate times my stroke volume. Can that be changed? Probably. Does it stop changing at some point? Maybe. There's potentially some evidence that you're not going to change the structure of the heart once you're, whatever it is, 18, 19, 20, 21, something like that. I'm not super familiar with that literature though, right? But conceptually, I can try to create change at the level of the heart to increase my cardiac output so I have more pumping capacity. Your other option then in the cardiovascular system is to grow more capillaries. It's called angiogenesis. If you can grow more capillaries, you got to think about this. You have a muscle and then you have capillaries that are all wrapped around this muscle tissue. If I put more capillaries around that muscle tissue, if I have more capillary per unit muscle, I have a greater surface area for oxygen to be able to exchange and move from the blood into the muscle. So those are kind of the big ones in the cardiovascular world. And then if we think from a muscular standpoint, what can we do? Well, once you're inside the muscle, we're playing a significant enzyme game. I'm trying to upregulate the number of enzymes I have so I can flux more stuff through these pathways faster. So that would then improve my ability to utilize oxygen. If I can have more mitochondria and I can have more enzymes, sorry, I didn't say mitochondria the first time around, right? You need a lot of them. So if I can have more mitochondria and I can have more enzymes that play in this aerobic pathway, then I can flux more things through those pathways and I can utilize oxygen faster and generate ATP at a faster rate. That's like a very rudimentary overview, essentially, of what we're trying to build when we talk about improving your endurance, your work capacity, and your repeatability. We're trying to hit those elements that I just mentioned, right? And so I think we're all on the same page in terms of how we go about this, is we like to break things into these higher days, and then we have these lower days. Most people only do high days. Stop it. Low days are really important. right? Like Ryan just mentioned, we have this work being done at this 110, 120, 130 beats per minute. Exactly what's happening physiologically, I don't think anybody knows per se, but I can tell you something is happening because people do that work. I'm watching their resting heart rate go down. I'm watching them, I'm getting the feedback of I'm digesting my food better. I'm sleeping better. I'm recovering better. Not to mention the fact that they can work at a pace that is significantly greater at the same heart rate where they were 2 months ago. Right? So I'd love to dive into this now, more of like the actual tips and advice in terms of thinking about these low days and these high days, because that's what we want to do. You want a combination of both. You want to have low days. I like to think of low days as more efficiency, miles per gallon. And then I have high days, which is all about horsepower. High days is where I'm chasing more of my enzymatic mitochondria change. Low days, again, I'm not entirely sure what's going on. Am I getting angiogenesis? Maybe. Am I changing things at the heart? Maybe. But the balance of using both days, I'm getting both for sure. Right? So I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in terms of how we actually are utilizing this in training and programming with our athletes.
I'll let you take that first, Keiran.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny timing because we're just wrapping up our summer programming with our hockey group. And we got one guy who he's a stud. He's going to actually go play at Army next year once his juniors contract is up. Great on the ice technically, right? But like off ice stuff, jumps through the roof, really strong, probably our fastest guy. But it's funny, like just we haven't done a ton of conditioning just with our schedule, the way it's set up in the summer. But I wanted to start like really showing them what a low day could look like as they kind of like go off and we start talking about like getting the preseason stuff together. And we had the heart rate monitors on, and we were actually experimenting with some of the tempos a little bit today on the True Form and the Airdyne. And it was funny. We had a couple guys, and everybody had like a nice little like kind of like mountain on the output, kind of like capped under, you know, most guys were 140, something like that. And then you see like a pretty good valley on the recovery, right? You want to see like that kind of like shift. You don't want to necessarily stay stuck. He was one of the guys staying stuck. And it's interesting because he's one of the guys who's been dealing with some injuries like outside of training from like with skating and stuff like that. So it was just a valuable, they're not saying they're directly correlated or whatever, but just interesting to be like, you know, hey, listen, like, let's try to, you're already like, you're crushing the other stuff. There's a lot of value in this low intensity work, right? For becoming more efficient, working on like the engine size or whatever you want to call it, right? Like he's pushing himself outside of workouts already, doing like 40 on, 20 off, like air quotes, like sprints. And it's like, I'm not sure if that's helping you or if that's just like crushing you more on top of like all the skates, all the workouts, potentially putting you in a more risk for injury, right? Versus this is not going to beat you up. You're probably going to feel physically better from this. You can almost treat it as like an active rest type day. And you're going to be more efficient. You'll recover on the bench quicker before or in between shifts, right? So I just think like one big thing, if I could like really hammer, and we try to hammer for most people, is there's a lot of value in those low days, whether it's like the cardiac output stuff, if your resting heart rate isn't where we want it to be, or if you are there, right, we might start playing around with some of the different kind of tempo splits, either a long or short kind of tempo split. But there's a ton of value in that, especially if you're already so busy on the other end. You only have so much that you could push, and this is just going to help you expand that.
You said he was doing 40-20?
Yeah. So
40 on, 20 off?
So, hey, where'd you get that from? Oh, I don't know. I just kind of picked two numbers. Okay. Yep.
Yes.
for 10 minutes. Dude, it was good.
And he probably went balls out on every single
He's
one.
not a kid you got to tell to work harder. So I'm sure he was hurting a little bit.
So he's essentially... This is the thing people have to keep in mind with glycolytics. I had someone message me the other day about this, saying it was actually on our training team in Train Heroic. One of my people DM'd me like, "Hey, I've actually been subbing the low day for 30-30s on the assault bike, and like I almost fell over at my desk." I was like, "Stop doing that. Stop it." They're like, "Yeah, but the other stuff just felt so easy." I'm like, "It's supposed to. That's the point. Trust in the process." Because what people don't realize is that when you're in these ranges, when we're doing 30-30s, and you can make a 30-30 in aerobic tempo if you just dial back your intensity. I know this person was not doing that. Or if you're the hockey player going all out 40-20s, this is glycolytic work. And you have to think about this. The body is incredibly adaptive. It's very smart. It doesn't want to waste resources. If you are doing a lot of work in a non-oxidative environment, the body will then learn and tell itself, oh, I need to learn to optimize in an environment that has little to no oxygen. I'm going to down-regulate all of these oxygen-related things because I don't need them. So you're just shooting yourself in the foot. You're making it worse.
Yeah.
Just want to jump. I had to get that
and
off.
then I'm sure we'll talk about some of the glycolytic stuff in a little bit. But correct me if I'm wrong. Don't you kind of maximize the adaptation potential after what is it, 4 or 5, 6 weeks or something like that? So
Happens
so
really
your
fast.
his season's not starting for another 8 weeks maybe for their preseason skate. So it's like just going to be spinning your wheels and you don't need to yet.
Mm-hmm. So you almost want to look at it as like you want to build up your aerobic system as high as possible, so you only have to shift into glycolytics when you really have to. And should that be enough to when you need it? Like I think if you look at it makes you think of fighters and stuff, and being a really crappy wrestler. I can relate to this. And that, the best wrestlers were just super chill, dude. It was, and part of that was just because they were wrestling guys like me, and they could just be totally relaxed because we weren't very good. But even when you watch them, and even fighters, when you watch the really good fighters, often they're not the fucking maniacs that come out in 20 seconds and just try to go for the KO. It's they're just utilizing as little as possible. And that was something I started to figure out towards the last year of training, because of wrestling, because for one, it's it is kind of badass, dude. If you get off the mat and you pin somebody and you're just nasal breathing, people are just fuck, dude, I wasn't even tired. You go through a whole match and you're just chill. That's really cool. But it also it teaches you to just become more efficient, I think. And there ends up being a lot less wasted. And then when it's time to go there, you're probably going to be able to go there. I almost think of glycolytics as just you just need to know that you can still do that. And I think if you're one of those psychopaths, you're always going to be able to do that. And then if you're not, then maybe it's almost it's the psychology is going to drive that type of training more than anything else. Do I even need to include that with that hockey player? No, because he thrives on that shit. He knows he's going to go there. When it's time to go there, he's going to go there. And he's not going to go there even when it's not time to go there. So now we're going to get a whole lot more bang for a buck by just making sure that, at least on the physiological level, that he doesn't need to be there all the time.
That's a great point too. The mentality, right? Just know you have it and then keep it moving. Right. But I love the concept of being as efficient as you can. Right. Cause you have so much time on the ice or field or whatever, be low, be chill, be athletic, be able to observe and scan the field. Don't be everything's locking in because your heart rate's jacked through the roof and the play's not even on, near you. So
yeah, your aerobic system is the most adaptable system we have physiologically by a landslide. It's not even close. There's very little reason for you to not try to bump that up and develop it. I'm not going to say as much as you can, because that's really going to depend more on the goals and what you're trying to do. There's a level to which there's essentially a floor. Everyone should be above this floor. And then the ceiling is just going to be dictated by you and your goals and what we're trying to accomplish. But I think another really good example in this realm, Ryan, where we're thinking about, you want to give yourself the ability to work as hard as you need to, right? And to not cross this threshold. And CrossFit's actually a really good example of this. If you look at the two most dominant men competitors in CrossFit, and people listening, CrossFit is a massively aerobic sport. It's pretty much all it is. It's a sport of a lot of, it's an interesting aerobics. One. Yeah. The two most dominant men, Rich Froning and Matt Frazier, if you watch them train and work out and compete, they are the kings of being able to operate at 85% of their capacity, and they're at the front of the pack. Meanwhile, you watch the other people in their field who are redlining trying to keep up with them. And that's a lot of what I think it's something that's really important to keep in mind here in this conversation, for sure.
I think not that I mean, you guys know that I don't pay attention to sports whatsoever, but it seems like there's always examples of those types of people in like every sport.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you guys could probably speak to that. I mean, you definitely speak to that more than I. But have you seen that?
I feel like you saw it a good bit in the Olympics that just wrapped up also. In the swimming events and a few other places, you could always see the people who, I'm hanging out at 80 to 90% of my capacity. I'm just hanging with the front of the field. And then when they're on the back end, they just drop the hammer. And it's like, okay, bye everybody. This has been fun. Right?
You saw that a ton in the qualifiers for like a lot of the track and field, like borderline people pulling up like too early. But yeah, they were just kind of like cruising, saving it for like, you know, the final heat of the day or whatever, where they're just like, oh man, like they just like totally cruised across there.
Yeah. And I think, so one thing that's important to bring up here, if people aren't aware of this, right? So the reason that this shift is so important, if you can stay in a place where you're primarily aerobic, if you can stay in a place where you're continuing to utilize oxygen and you're doing so efficiently, then we're not getting this intense metabolic byproduct that comes from pH change and a whole bunch of other things that end up in that metabolic milieu. And we're not going to go too far down the path again because it's not like super relevant here, but we got to keep that in mind. The reason that people are sitting here wondering like, well, why is this actually so important? Like why do I need to work so hard to try to stay aerobic on some of these things? The reason is because once you're out of that aerobic range, you just start the clock. It's only a matter of time until you fatigue, because when you're no longer aerobic, you get a lot of byproducts. Lactate comes flying around, massive pH changes, a bunch of other things. Once that stuff starts popping up, you are going to fatigue very rapidly. That just is what it is. So we've talked about these low options. We have this more cardiac output style conditioning, and you can do that in terms of a circuit. You can do it on a bike. You can put things together where we're just trying to hang out 110, 130 beats per minute, be there for 30 minutes to an hour, right? And then if your resting heart rate's beneath 60 beats per minute, we can start playing around more with Charlie Francis style tempos. And you have a lot of leeway in the tempos in how you structure those in terms of work like on and off. But the key here on all of these is that your intensity is low. You're at a 7 or lower on all of these. You can nasal breathe. You can carry on a conversation, right? The high conditioning is a very different conversation. The high conditioning is where you're intentionally redlining. You're intentionally trying to push your gas pedal all the way down to the floor, and you're trying to see how long can I hold my gas pedal down before it has to slowly start coming up, right? And so that's where we can use, again, traditional conditioning elements. We can put you on a bike, we can have you run, or we can use Metcons for those sorts of things, right? And that's where we're trying to improve that horsepower of your engine. I'm thinking giving you more enzymes, giving you more mitochondria, things in that realm, right? And so, Ryan, I'd be curious, because I think you do a really good job blending these different elements with your hypertrophy people in terms of giving them the conditioning they need so that they can contribute to the fact that their number one priority is to lift and get huge and put on muscle. So how do you think about blending these two things with your people?
I really like we talked about more the psychological part of beginning a training program with some of these work capacity cycles. But I really do think that there's some mechanistic rationale for why that would be appropriate as well. And I think it really does. I like to do that in a, like right off the bat, because I think once we building an adaptation is a lot harder than maintaining it. Right. So if we can go through something right off the bat, that's probably like the worst thing in itself for hypertrophy. Like as far as the response goes, and the stimulus for a response, it's very low. It's very low on the totem pole as far as hypertrophy goes. I think we can still get it, especially if you're someone doesn't have a whole lot of muscle mass. Like I think you can still get it with these circuits, but it's primarily going to be, or however you're doing it, it's primarily going to be aerobic adaptations that are taking place, or central adaptations, or just taking the brakes off, or whatever the fuck's going on. So I like to front load the program with that type of stuff. And that's when that's kind of, for the most part, that's like the only time that I'll really utilize some of those harder protocols where they really are probably getting some of those enzymatic changes and mitochondrial changes. And I think that's enough to maintain, like, so what I'll do is that initial training cycle is going to be a more work capacity focused cycle. We know that the aerobic system adapts really quickly, so you don't have to do that for very long. I don't think you need to run that for 12 weeks. I think you can get that done in 4 to 6 weeks in most cases, maybe even less than that if you have previous exposure to it. And then from there, like, going into something that's a little bit more local in nature and still hanging around with some of that higher end stuff, because it will support some of these incomplete rest types of protocols and short rest and more metabolic, like local metabolic type of stuff. And then I think once you develop that, then you could probably hang on to at least the aerobic conditioning by just having a day or two a week. That's more on the low end. And you're going to get some pseudo high end stuff by just doing some hard sets with bigger muscle groups. And then you just kind of take that to the point where they start to drop off. And you can see that in resting heart rate a lot of times, that their resting heart rate starts to climb back up. Okay, well, maybe it's time to run a quick work capacity pivot. Or they just are subjectively feeling really fatigued all the time. Or, like, I think a lot of times we're looking at the training itself and like, oh, maybe we need to deload, or like, well, maybe like it may not just be like a deload. You may need to deload from that specific stimulus for a while. And you need to bring up the thing that just helps with everything in general. So that's kind of how I like to look at it, is like, I want to front load a training program or a macro cycle with some type of work capacity cycle that's going to really build up the aerobic system and respiratory systems. And then once we have that, then we can just maintain it with the work. And then every now and then we're just going to throw in like a 1 to 2 week pivot where they do some of that just horrendous crap again. And it reminds them at the very least that they are able to push to those places. But I also think, I mean, you just feel it immediately. It's kind of crazy. Like if you just do, like, I'll do these like 1 week pivots where we'll just do like a 30-30 type workout, like a circuit type workout 3 times that week. And that first one is so fucking bad. And then by the third one, you're actually adding weight or adding reps. Like, it's like, not only are you getting through it, like a lot of times people don't even make it through it the first time. And then like in that week, by the third time that they do it, they're either getting all the reps or they're even adding weight at that point. It's pretty wild. But I don't think that it happens unless you've built that up previously. And that, I'm not sure if that's actually true. But it just seems to be the way that it goes. I don't know if there's that's kind of like this. It's like a mitochondrial memory or something, which I'll coin that term. Thank you very much. I don't know. I haven't heard that one. So, but it's like there's probably, it seems like there is kind of this, whatever the hell you want to call it. It's like once you've had these exposures to these different things. I mean, I don't know, James. Is there this quicker response in terms of proteins and things that are changing when we've had previous exposures?
It could be. So there's evidence in some different realms. So I did a lot of reading into Nerf 2 when I was in grad school. We don't need to talk about what Nerf 2 is, but essentially
it's a gun, like a little rubber.
Yeah. That's what it is. It's a big gun.
It's a toy gun. Yeah.
And it shoots foam things with a rubber tip on it.
Yeah,
I'm going to be honest. That's exactly where my mind went. So I'm really happy that you were thinking that too.
But no, so like Nerf 2 is the primary thing responsible for maintaining cellular redox balance. So as the oxidative reductive tone in the cell changes, Nerf 2 is what goes in. It's a transcription factor, hits the DNA, antioxidant response element. It's trying to maintain redox balance in the cell, which is hugely important because that's going to dictate how certain things move around. The reason I mentioned that is because I could buy what you're saying, because what you see, which is really interesting, is that with training, the actual quantity of the Nerf 2 protein itself doesn't really change that much. What you're changing is the mRNA that's floating around the cytosol. You essentially have told the cell, like, I need to be ready for this insult. I don't need to always have my army out and ready to go. Like, they're not always at war, but they need to be ready for whenever the insult does come. And so what you end up seeing is that the mRNA levels increase. And then another thing called a small interfering RNA increase with it. So the small interfering RNA keeps the mRNA from becoming a full functioning protein. But then when the insult shows up, the small interfering RNAs go away. Now I have this massive pool of mRNAs that can quickly become Nerf2 proteins. And now all of a sudden, I'm able to formulate this massive response very rapidly. So I could buy what you're saying in terms of this memory of if we're going to hypothetically talk about a potential mechanism, you have high levels of mRNA floating around being bound by small interfering RNAs, keeping them from being transcribed. But then once the correct insult, the correct stimulus shows up, those mRNAs very rapidly become proteins so that you can upregulate as needed. That would be how I would think about it.
Much cooler than the
and you just get more.
I can't argue that.
It's cooler than the Nerf gun I was thinking about. So yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. I remember one of my roommates I had out here in Salt Lake was so funny when I had the books on the bookshelf. I had the Polyvagal Theory. And I was reading it at the time, and he walks in and he's like, "Oh, the Polyvagal Theory."
I know about that Polyvagal.
Yeah, that Polyvagal Theory. Yeah, we won't go into the details of where he went next, but I think most people listening can probably get themselves there when you just think about Polyvagal Theory, and then he was talking about the Polyvagal Theory.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah, okay. That took me a little bit of time.
I pronounced it incorrectly the first time.
Okay, yeah.
Keiran, so how about let's have you jump in here. So I think Ryan has such an awesome approach with the more hypertrophy focused people we've got. But then I know that you and me, we get more of the, I want to be the super well-rounded total package, give me all the attribute bars people. And so when we think about training them, this aerobic endurance component is so huge and so important, not only from a performance standpoint, but like we've hammered a bunch on recovery, both recovery between sessions, but also within a session. Like if you go run a sprint, the thing that's responsible for recovering you before your next sprint is your aerobic system. So I guess we've mentioned we have these low days, we have these high days. How do you like to blend those into training with people?
Yeah, I think like I really can hit on and get away with a lot of the lower end aerobic methods for a long time with a lot of people, just because I do deal with a lot of like gen pop, finance, men and women and stuff like that. But I think I really like we had talked about in the oxygen course with that like kind of convergent model where like, and even with the athletes too, right? Just like try to hold off on needing to hit like the glycolytic stuff as long as possible. So we'll do like a lot of those lower end aerobic methods, right? The cardiac output, the tempo work, stuff like that. And for some gen pop people, like the high cardio stimulus could be like their high resistance intervals, the high intensity continuous training, where it's now you're dealing with more like repeat power, repeat sprint stuff, but it's a long enough rest and you're very purposely capping the intensity where it stays very aerobic in nature. And I think more of the power repeatability plus the really low, slow cardiac output or the tempo interval stuff can take you a really long way until, you know, if somebody's really concerned with performance, then you could kind of finish with potentially ending with some like lactic power or like capacity type stuff, depending on their sport or what they're going to do. Because if you're talking about an athlete, right, you know, they're going to get bagged first week or two of tryouts to see who's mentally, you know, like, and actually it's funny, Ryan talking about like the mental aspect of that and knowing that you could go there, like it kind of does make me appreciate the coaches, you know, let's just run them till they puke just to make sure they're mentally tough enough. Like, I think there is like a little valid, you know, there's always a valid point to that. I think that
there is a time and a place where what you're doing, you don't need to be able to really give tons of rationale besides the fact that it's just going to suck and we're going to get mentally tougher. Yeah. That is a thing. Sometimes people on the internet lose their mind and I see all this stuff about, well, just because it's hard. It's like, yeah, I get it. Sometimes though, it's worth doing something that just sucks. Like, and you don't need to be a reference. Yeah. You don't even need a reference. You don't need a good rationale.
Yeah.
Like,
well, go ahead. Yeah. I get super excited about this because it's just like, I so much of my life, I just tried to do this to myself to the point where it's like my own demise eventually. But I really think, I think about like the way that I used to approach bodybuilding when I was like 10 to 16 to 18. It was so like, it was so neurotic and so unnecessary. Like eating like 8 to 9 meals a day, like literally crying. Like if I was late, and I'm not like exaggerating, I literally cried being 20 minutes late to meals. Like I mean, I can remember multiple times. Like, so it was so unnecessary, but it created this reference of just, that was so terrible. Like it can completely control my life. And now that I'm eating 4 meals a day, it's like, dude, it's like, I'm a free man. Like it's so fucking easy. And I think that there's so much to that with this type of training, as well as like hey guys, you remember when we had to just run for like ever? Like, and it was just like puking everywhere. This isn't that bad. Like, so it's just knowing that you have that reference there for something that was much worse, I feel like is so important. Like I think it pays dividends.
That's so true. I think or having the James program, like because I think you can intelligently do that, right? Like probably save that for the end of your training week, or like to your point, like right at the end of like a long training block, and then you're going to deload or whatever. But James having the Metcons for us in Silverback and stuff, like, I mean, that took me back to like high school basketball, where we'd like I remember vividly me and my buddy taking, like, I'd push him out of the way to puke, and then he'd push me out of the way to puke. And it just took me, like the glycolytic repeat sprints, our whole team was texting each other, and we were all in the bathroom. It was only 3 reps. We're all in the bathroom for 10 minutes texting each other, just puking everything out. And then we had to do another 3 reps. And you're just like, and that's like, like when people ask me what's the hardest thing, like I could vividly call that stuff up from some of those Metcons. And also to give you a quick shout out, you doing in Costa Rica, the front squat, the bench press, and then the 1 minute all out assault.
God.
I was floored that, I mean, like, did you, I don't know how far you went, but in a minute, I was like, there's no way a human should do that fresh. And you did it after the body weight front squats and the bench press, which was outrageous to me.
So yeah, that's gnarly. That was Ben's creation. It's awful.
We posted that on Instagram the other day as a challenge workout. I wanted to see what people would put up.
Oh, what was it 20 front
we
squat?
Modified
15?
it. Yeah,
Okay.
we modified it slightly just because we needed to standardize it a little bit to make sure everybody was like on the same time domain. But it was like you had from 0 to 1 minute to do your, I don't remember which order it went in. From 0 to 1 minute to do, was it squat, bench, then bike, or was it bench, squat, bike? Either way.
I think it was 20 rep. Yeah, 20 rep squat for body weight, 20 rep squat, and then a minute rest.
Front
15
squat.
Rep bench, front squat.
Yep.
15 rep bench, and then the bike.
Yeah, we had to set up like you had from 0 to 1 minute to hit, I think, 20 body weight front squats. You had from 1 to 2 minute to hit 15 body weight bench press. And then at 2 minutes, you had to get on and go 1 minute for max calories on the bike.
Okay, so you just go. So I think we had a rest in between there. So yeah, basically the same thing, but yeah.
We set it up to, but so you can cake your rest in. So like if you finish your squats and say 40 seconds, you get 20 seconds rest before the minute. Yeah. And then if you crush your bench, you can get 30 seconds rest. So it's like, yeah, that's an interesting one. That'll definitely be like a pillar workout for us moving forward.
Yeah, just one of the, like, this is one of those things where you're just like, how do I get out of my body so I don't have to feel this anymore? Like, I don't want to be in my body anymore. This, like, and that's when it's over. It's just like, and then you're just laying there, just like, there's nothing I can do to not feel this anymore. Like, I just don't want to feel.
I also
this
vividly
anymore.
remember how bad you were writhing on the floor for, it had to have been 10 minutes. And not only that, it's Costa Rica, where it's just like so ungodly hot, where I was just like, well, I just feel completely emasculated. I'm just going to go have dinner now and not do that.
I don't know, dude. I mean, like, I'm pretty sure that I like peed and cried on myself, so I don't know that I was really the masculine one in that group. So I was like, I didn't feel that tough at the time.
But we're talking about stuff that sucks here. Was important, Keiran. I know you mentioned I always like putting Metcons on Saturdays and my programs, like lifting Monday, Wednesday, Friday, tempos on Tuesday, cardiac output on Thursday, and then some type of high conditioning on Saturday, either Metcons or really shitty running, biking, something along those lines, right? But what people have to keep in mind is that there's no such thing as doing high conditioning that is not absolutely miserable. There's no way. It's like, this is a gas pedal down exercise. Just because it's aerobic does not mean that it's going to be easy. It's going to be 10 minutes of you getting absolutely buried. I want to see how hard you can push your gas pedal down. I want to see how long you can keep it down for. That's high conditioning. It's going to suck. It has to suck. If it doesn't suck, you're not doing it right. And then like the other thing of glycolytics, most people don't do glycolytics correctly, because like you said, if you do glycolytics correctly, I will bet most of my money that in 3 reps, you'll be off the bike vomiting. Because we ran that experiment on Silverback, and pretty much everybody vomited after 3 reps, and I had to decrease the volume significantly because I got way too aggressive with it.
Hey,
right?
So I got a proxy for our listeners. If you're not a little bit nauseous right now, just hearing James talking about that, you haven't been doing it right.
Yeah.
Like I had to eat after this. I like literally feel nauseous right now just thinking about that shit.
It's the most miserable experience on the planet. Like it's literally no oxygen and your body is screaming at you. It's to the point, it wants you to stop so bad, it's going to force you to vomit.
Yeah. That's the only thing that feels kind of better.
Yeah. And I was going to say the only reason that I would, like the only times in training I like to bring in glycolytic work is if I'm trying to get some type of a peak for like a singular effort, because we do know from repeat sprint literature that the glycolytic system plays a significant role on sprint number 1 or lift number 1, whatever it's going to be. Like the glycolytic system will play a really significant role on that first big effort. It almost disappears entirely by the time I'm back to like my second or third effort though. So like I think it's actually a really good tool to bring in, one, mentally just to touch it, to go there, to be like, okay, I can suffer and I can do this. But I think it also does help when we're trying to peak people for certain types of things, like a singular sprint effort, or I'm trying to hit a top single or a top double, things like that. Like I do think that it will play an important role there. But we're right at 1 hour and 6 minutes. This is such a massive topic. We could talk about this for days. We probably should have pick one thing to talk about in here, but this was fun. I like just riffing on these things. Once I get both of you to move to Knoxville with us, this is what every day is going to be like. We're just going to lift, hang out in the barn.
That's it.
Eat food.
Okay, good.
And just I'm just going to we'll have a whole wall of the barn. It's just going to be nothing but a whiteboard. And it's just going to be yeah.
I thought you meant we're going to do like a lot of these intervals and stuff.
Oh, fuck that. No.
I'm like, well, no, I don't think I can make it.
Yeah. I like talking about it. I don't necessarily like doing it.
Yeah, no, I already did it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm done.
I have done it. I am in no rush to do it in the near future.
You do like it though. You do like it.
Yeah, it is. It's an addiction. A good addiction.
It's true, man. It's true.
Can't not suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Kelsey makes fun of me for that a lot. Because if we go on vacation, I got about 2 to 3 days, and then she can tell I get like really uneasy. I have to start like pacing. She's like, "Do you need to go work out?" I'm like, "Yeah, I need to go work out. Like this is not
something. You need to do something that doesn't feel fun." Yeah.
Nice guys. Well,
can't enjoy things without suffering.
Any closing thought or takeaway that you would like for the listeners to take with them? Here, if you're going to take like one thing that we talked about from this 1 hour and 8 minutes of an excursion through talking endurance and work capacity and the ability to endure, what's the one thing you want them to walk away with? Keiran, lead the charge.
Selfishly, I usually just come on these to like pick your guys' brains more. So I'm going to go this way with it. I really like the psychological component that Ryan was talking about with knowing what the suck feels like and having the confidence to go there when you need to, whether you're an athlete or just looking to get big.
Yeah, and along those same lines, I think just if you're one of those people who really likes to go there, you're already a psychopath. Like you're gonna go there when you have to. So just reserve it for when you really need to. I think that can be a really important lesson. Try to challenge yourself in a different way. Try to see like how cool can I stay and how high can my workout be without going to that place. I think that's an interesting challenge. And I think like as a practical thing, a nasal breathing type of work can be really useful for that. So go ahead, like take that nasal breathing out. See how far you can do that, how high you can get your heart rate, but still stay cool.
Yeah, I really like both of those. And all I was going to say is don't overcomplicate things. Do low days, do high days. If you do both, you're going to probably crush it. Obviously, we can get into more details and more specifics there, but if you're doing days where you're more nasal breathing, it's a little bit longer. It's more like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes. It's on a bike. It's running tempos, right? And then when you need to go just balls out into your hard days, like that needs to be a gas pedal down. Too many people just place themselves in the middle. They don't ever really go that slow. They don't ever really go that hard. And so you're in this awkward middle ground, right? Do both. Don't be in the middle. Either go low or go balls to the wall high, and you'll be great. That's kind of what I want to leave people with.
Nice.
Nice, guys. Well, everybody have an amazing week.
Thanks, guys.
Talk to you soon.
Talk soon.
Nice.